What if a royal's entire existence was deliberately wiped from history? For Princess Thyra, this wasn't a conspiracy theory, it was her reality. Prepare to uncover the shocking truth behind the scandalous silence that erased her from the annals of royalty, a story so compelling you'll wonder how it stayed hidden for so long. In the late 19th century, the European royal landscape was both intricate and rigidly structured. Monarchies were not simply ceremonial, they were powerful symbols of national identity and political stability. Within these royal networks, children were born into positions that determined their social standing, potential influence, and the trajectory of their personal lives. Among these children was a princess whose existence, while entirely legitimate and connected to the established royal hierarchy, remained surprisingly obscure in historical records. Her story challenges the assumption that royal birth automatically guarantees public recognition or lasting fame. It invites an inquiry into the forces that decide which members of a royal family are remembered and celebrated, and which are quietly relegated to the margins of history. This princess entered the world at a time when Denmark was navigating both domestic and international pressures. The late 1800s were marked by the aftermath of territorial conflicts, particularly those affecting Schleswig and Holstein, which had reshaped Danish national boundaries. Denmark's monarchy sought stability, and the role of its members extended beyond ceremonial duties. Every birth in the royal family was a matter of public interest, recorded meticulously in annals and newspapers. Despite this, certain births, even those of daughters of recognized monarchs, did not always translate into a lasting public presence. This divergence between official acknowledgement and historical memory frames the peculiar obscurity surrounding her life. From the moment she was born, her familial connections positioned her within an extensive network of European royalty. Her immediate family included kings and queens whose marriages were politically significant, designed to reinforce alliances or secure the monarchy's influence. Royal children were expected to contribute to the family's stature, whether through strategic marriages, social engagements, or participation in ceremonial duties. Yet, the expectations placed upon her were likely circumscribed by her position in the line of succession, her gender, and the prevailing social norms governing female members of royalty. These norms often dictated a life of measured appearances and restricted agency, constraining her opportunities for independent recognition. The princess's life is intriguing because, despite being part of a prominent royal house, her narrative remains underexplored. Unlike her male counterparts or those who entered high-profile marriages, she does not occupy a prominent place in contemporary accounts or in modern histories of European royalty. One must consider the mechanisms that contribute to historical visibility. Public attention often follows power, wealth, and scandal. Individuals who did not marry into foreign thrones, participate in governance, or engage in controversies might be intentionally or inadvertently overshadowed by those who did. In her case, the absence of conspicuous public events in her early years may have contributed to the fading of her story from collective memory. Yet even within obscurity, subtle indications hint at a life rich in potential significance. Records note her birth with a precision reserved for royal children, detailing dates, parentage, and immediate family relations. She was born into a family with a meticulously maintained genealogical record, connecting her to a lineage that included monarchs of Denmark and ties to other European thrones. These connections would have been crucial in a society that valued bloodlines and dynastic continuity. They also emphasize the paradox. Someone born into historical significance can nonetheless slip into near anonymity if circumstances align in such a way. Her obscurity invites further investigation into what might have been deliberately minimized or overlooked by chroniclers. Anomaly in historical recognition is not uncommon in royal histories. Many individuals who were legitimate heirs or princesses did not receive extensive coverage, either because their roles were perceived as minor or because other family members attracted greater attention. The princess in question exemplifies this phenomenon. Her life raises questions about the criteria by which certain figures are deemed worthy of commemoration. Was it simply a matter of circumstance, or were there deliberate choices by family members or court officials to limit her visibility? These are difficult questions to answer definitively, but the lack of extensive documentation suggests a combination of social norms, family dynamics, and historical oversight. Her obscured presence contrasts sharply with the attention afforded to other contemporary royals. In the same period, Female royals who married into foreign dynasties often became household names, recorded in the chronicles of multiple nations. Their marriages were diplomatic events, widely publicized and subsequently analyzed by historians. The princess under consideration did not follow this path. She remained within the domestic sphere of her own country, her movements and contributions largely unreported. Such relative invisibility underscores the selective nature of historical memory. It is not always the inherent worth or accomplishments of an individual that dictate remembrance, but rather the context in which those achievements are framed and documented. Her story is further complicated by the societal expectations placed upon women of her station. Royal daughters were often valued for their potential to secure alliances through marriage, their capacity to embody moral virtue, and their ability to participate in charitable or ceremonial functions. However, opportunities for public distinction were limited compared with those available to male heirs. This structural limitation, combined with her particular position within the family hierarchy, likely contributed to the absence of a widely known personal narrative. Even the seemingly mundane aspects of her life, education, social engagements, personal interests, remain sparsely recorded, leaving a gap that historians and enthusiasts must approach cautiously. Despite the scant records, certain elements of her early life provide insight into her circumstances. She was born into an environment shaped by formal etiquette, strict observation of protocol, and the maintenance of public image. Her parents, well aware of the significance of royal perception, would have overseen her upbringing with the dual intent of protecting the family's reputation and ensuring her readiness for future responsibilities. The careful management of public knowledge about her existence may have contributed to her later obscurity. Information about her daily life, personal achievements, or character traits appears largely confined to private correspondence or official registries, documents that often remain inaccessible or underexplored. Her life invites speculation about the experiences of royals whose stories do not dominate textbooks or media narratives. It highlights the ways in which historical narratives are constructed, privileging certain individuals while marginalizing others. In this context, she represents a broader category of historical figures whose significance is muted not by the lack of inherent interest, but by the priorities of record keepers and the conventions of their time. Such figures are often rediscovered only when scholars or genealogists seek to trace family trees or investigate overlooked chapters of royal history. Another factor contributing to her obscurity may relate to broader political and social developments of her era. The turn of the 19th century was a period of modernization, shifting national identities, and the gradual reevaluation of monarchical roles. In Denmark, as in other European countries, the monarchy was increasingly expected to adapt to contemporary expectations while preserving tradition. Individuals who did not assume active roles in this transformation often became peripheral in historical accounts. The princess's story, while quietly intertwined with these developments, does not appear to have intersected with publicized political or social milestones in a way that would have ensured lasting recognition. The contrast between her official royal status and her limited historical footprint prompts a reconsideration of what it means to be notable. Visibility in history is often the product of narrative selection rather than a reflection of intrinsic worth. For royals, this is especially pronounced because the mechanisms of documentation, official court records, newspapers, memoirs, were selective and influenced by contemporary politics, public interest, and family priorities. Those whose lives were quiet, conventional, or managed to avoid controversy could be entirely absent from public consciousness, regardless of their formal rank. In this sense, the princess serves as an example of how personal significance can be overshadowed by structural and societal factors. It is also possible that the deliberate management of family image contributed to what could be described as a silence surrounding her life. Royal families have long been adept at controlling narratives, emphasizing accomplishments and downplaying events that might be perceived as disruptive or unflattering. This careful curation of legacy might explain why certain members, despite legitimate claims to historical attention, remain largely invisible to both contemporary audiences and later generations of historians. The princess's obscurity may thus be understood not simply as a product of neglect, but as a reflection of intentional or systemic historical discretion. Her position within the family tree highlights another layer of complexity. European royal families were interconnected through marriage alliances that extended across national boundaries. The network of relations often determined access to power, influence, and historical remembrance. Being born into a domestic branch, without prominent foreign marriage alliances or political appointments, could result in relative historical anonymity. This underscores the way lineage interacts with circumstance. Formal connections to royalty do not automatically guarantee public or historical prominence. In her case, her ties were strong, but they did not translate into a lasting presence in the public imagination. Even in modern historical research, she remains a figure who is difficult to locate within broader narratives. Scholars who focus on the period tend to concentrate on kings, reigning queens, and those who shaped policy or married into politically significant positions. Those who do not intersect with these defining moments often remain footnotes. Yet these footnotes can reveal much about the lived experience of royal individuals who existed in the shadows of more prominent family members. Through careful reconstruction of birth records, family correspondences, and contemporary accounts, it is possible to piece together elements of their experiences, providing a richer understanding of the social and familial structures of the time. The limited visibility of her story contrasts sharply with the wealth of information available about other royals of the same period. Public ceremonies, diplomatic marriages, and international travel were often meticulously documented, while quieter domestic lives were left largely unrecorded. This disparity illustrates the selective nature of historical documentation. While the princess's life may not have intersected with dramatic or publicly noteworthy events, her experience provides insight into the everyday realities of those born into privilege but constrained by social norms and family expectations. Her story also reflects the broader tension between personal identity and prescribed roles. Royal children were expected to fulfill duties determined by birth, often with limited autonomy. The tension between personal inclination and public expectation could be profound, influencing education, social behavior, and opportunities for engagement in cultural or charitable pursuits. Her obscured history may, in part, reflect this tension, where private experiences remained hidden behind the public facade of royal decorum. The narrative of this princess presents a compelling study in historical omission. Born into a royal family in Denmark during the late 1800s, she occupied a legitimate and significant position in the family hierarchy. Yet, despite the importance of her lineage, her story remains largely hidden. Factors contributing to this include societal norms regarding female royals, selective historical documentation, family priorities, and the absence of dramatic public engagement. Her life highlights the complexities of historical memory, illustrating that official status does not automatically equate to public recognition. It invites a re-evaluation of the ways in which histories are written and remembered, emphasizing the importance of exploring the lives of those who exist at the margins of recorded events. By examining her existence, one gains insight into the structures and expectations that shaped royal lives and into the processes that determine which stories are preserved and which fade into relative silence. Princess Thyra's existence extends beyond the mere recording of a name in official registries. She was born into a world that was as structured as it was hierarchical, a world in which her daily life, ambitions, and sense of self were inevitably intertwined with the expectations and protocols of a royal household. From the earliest moments of her life, she was a figure whose presence carried implicit meaning. She was a daughter of a king and queen, connected by blood to a network of European dynasties, and expected to embody the qualities deemed desirable for a young princess. Yet, within these constraints, she was also a young individual with her own curiosity, awareness, and potential for self-expression. Understanding who she was requires looking not only at the formal trappings of her birth, but also at the social and familial environment that shaped her early development. Her childhood was marked by a combination of privilege and regulation. As a member of the Danish royal family, she would have had access to education, cultural enrichment, and exposure to political awareness in ways that few could imagine outside of royalty. Language, music, literature, and etiquette were central to her upbringing, and tutors would have guided her through a curriculum designed to cultivate a refined intellect and polished social skills. These lessons were not merely academic. They were meant to prepare her for a life in which personal conduct could reflect upon the entire monarchy. Even at a young age, she would have been acutely aware of her position and the responsibilities it implied, learning the delicate balance between personal desire and duty to the crown. Beyond education, Princess Thyra's early years were shaped by intimate family relationships. Her parents, King Frederick VIII and Queen Louise, were figures of authority, but they also provided the framework for familial bonds that were unusually close for a royal household. The Danish royal family of the time maintained a strong sense of cohesion, valuing shared experiences, domestic life, and interpersonal support within the household. This environment afforded her moments of private warmth, laughter, and companionship that contrasted with the formal public life she would inevitably encounter. Her siblings, including those who would later ascend to the thrones of Denmark and Norway, formed a network of relationships in which loyalty, rivalry, and affection coexisted. These connections shaped her sense of identity and contributed to her understanding of her place within the family and, by extension, the larger royal institution. Being part of such a prominent family carried both privileges and burdens. While her lineage provided security and a clear social position, it also demanded adherence to a set of expectations that could limit personal freedom. Marriages, public appearances, and even personal interests were often subject to negotiation in the context of dynastic strategy and public image. As a daughter of the king and queen, her actions and demeanor were scrutinized, recorded, and sometimes interpreted by courtiers and chroniclers. Even her dreams and aspirations would have been filtered through the lens of what was considered suitable for a princess. Nonetheless, within these confines, she likely nurtured her own ambitions and passions, exploring the world around her and forming the foundations of her personality, which may have been as lively, imaginative, and introspective as any young person's. Her familial network was especially significant, as it not only linked her to contemporary power, but also positioned her within the larger European context. The Danish royal family maintained close ties with other European dynasties, and these connections carried both social and political implications. Princess Thyra's siblings would later assume roles as kings, reinforcing the prominence of their family in international affairs. This close-knit network likely instilled a sense of security in her, giving the impression that her place within the royal hierarchy was secure and respected. It also offered her opportunities for observation and learning, allowing her to witness firsthand the ways in which monarchy functioned, how diplomacy operated, and how familial ties could intersect with political strategy. Despite the formal structure of her environment, Princess Thyra's early life would have been imbued with moments of personal exploration and emotional development. Royal children were not immune to the joys and challenges of childhood, and her days likely included playful interactions, early interests in arts or literature, and the gradual formation of her own worldview. These formative experiences contributed to the development of her character, shaping a personality that was more than a mere function of her title. Observing her parents and siblings, engaging with tutors and companions, and participating in family rituals would have informed her understanding of morality, duty, and the complexities of human relationships. In this way, she existed simultaneously as a princess of considerable social significance and as a young individual discovering her own identity. Her position within the Danish royal family also meant that her life was observed by a wider circle of courtiers and advisors. While she enjoyed the intimacy of family life, she was also part of a household that adhered to rigorous ceremonial and social standards. Court life demanded the cultivation of grace, poise, and social intelligence, traits that were essential for anyone who might later represent the monarchy in public or diplomatic contexts. These lessons, while potentially constraining, also provided her with tools to navigate complex social environments and develop a nuanced understanding of the interplay between personal conduct and public perception. Princess Thyra's story, when viewed in the context of her family and historical period, also invites reflection on the nature of historical visibility. While her siblings and other royal figures might have been more widely documented due to their roles in governance or their marriages into other European dynasties, her life demonstrates that not all royal experiences are equally recorded or remembered. The very security and cohesion of her family may have contributed to a quiet stability that left fewer dramatic events for chroniclers to note. In this sense, the absence of widely recognized narratives about her early years is not necessarily indicative of insignificance, but rather of a domestic and private life that existed largely out of the public eye. Nevertheless, the apparent calm and structure of her upbringing masked the potential for future change and disruption. Within the framework of the royal household, her identity was closely tied to her family and the expectations of her station. Yet personal ambitions, relationships, and unforeseen events could always shift the trajectory of her life. The seemingly secure place she held within the royal family was both a comfort and a limitation, offering stability while simultaneously constraining opportunities for independent prominence. This tension between personal desire and prescribed role sets the stage for the dramatic developments that would later shape her life, highlighting the ways in which individual experience intersects with broader historical and familial forces. Her early personality, while not extensively recorded in public documents, can be inferred through the context of her upbringing and familial relationships. The environment in which she was nurtured emphasized education, moral conduct, and cultural engagement, suggesting that she was likely curious, observant, and capable of forming meaningful social connections. These qualities would have allowed her to navigate the expectations of court life with intelligence and subtlety, building relationships that were essential for both personal and social fulfillment. Her capacity for observation and reflection, combined with the intimacy of a supportive family network, positioned her to engage with the world around her in ways that went beyond ceremonial duties. The close ties among members of the Danish royal family also played a role in shaping her understanding of loyalty, responsibility, and kinship. Observing her siblings as they prepared for future roles as kings would have provided her with models of leadership, negotiation, and public engagement. While her own public role may have been more limited, the lessons embedded in these familial interactions contributed to her comprehension of governance, duty, and social dynamics. This understanding would have been invaluable in later years, equipping her with the insight to navigate complex social and political environments even without occupying a position of overt authority. Moreover, the intimate bonds within her family likely fostered a sense of emotional security and identity formation. Unlike royals who experienced frequent relocation or separation due to diplomatic marriages, she benefited from a household in which familial presence was relatively constant and accessible. This environment enabled her to develop a stable sense of self, rooted in both her lineage and the support of those closest to her. At the same time, the predictability of her early environment may have delayed the confrontation with broader societal challenges, creating a contrast between the sheltered nature of her childhood and the potential upheavals of later life. The interplay between privilege and constraint is evident throughout her formative years. While she had access to the finest education, cultural opportunities, and familial support, the expectations of decorum, protocol, and dynastic propriety shaped every aspect of her daily life. This duality, advantage paired with limitation, is central to understanding her personality and potential ambitions. She would have learned to navigate both opportunity and restriction, developing skills of adaptation, observation, and patience that were critical for surviving and thriving within a royal household. These skills, while subtle, are indicative of the complexity of her character and the depth of her personal experience. Her position as the daughter of the king and queen, coupled with her relationships with siblings destined for future monarchies, reinforced her sense of belonging within the royal hierarchy. She was not a peripheral figure. She occupied a defined place within a structured familial and social system. Yet, this position also highlighted the boundaries of her potential influence. Unlike those who might wield power directly or engage in highly visible political roles, her contributions were likely framed by the domestic and ceremonial spheres, emphasizing the value of presence, support, and measured engagement rather than overt leadership. This context clarifies the nature of her early aspirations, hopes, and the framework in which her personal development occurred. In contemplating her early life, it becomes clear that Princess Thyra was more than a name or a birth date within a genealogical chart. She was an individual shaped by circumstance, endowed with potential, and immersed in a family environment that combined affection, structure, and expectation. Her early years laid the foundation for understanding her later life, revealing both the security of her upbringing and the subtle constraints imposed by her station. The apparent stability of her position, the richness of her familial connections, and the cultivation of her intellect and character all contribute to a portrait of a young princess whose personal experiences were deeply entwined with the broader currents of royal life. Ultimately, her story at this stage underscores the duality of visibility and invisibility within historical records. While the prominence of her family ensured documentation of her birth and lineage, the quieter aspects of her personality, dreams, and early aspirations were often unrecorded, leaving modern historians to infer and reconstruct them through context and analysis. Her early life, characterized by a blend of privilege, education, familial intimacy, and social expectation, sets the stage for the developments that would challenge her sense of security and personal identity, foreshadowing a trajectory that would intertwine personal experience with the pressures and unpredictabilities of royal life. Princess Thyra's early life, while seemingly sheltered and structured within the routines of the Danish royal household, was marked by moments that distinguished her from her siblings and peers. In the carefully orchestrated environment of court life, even small deviations from expectation could be noticed and commented upon. While her upbringing emphasized discipline, education, and decorum, subtle incidents began to hint at a personality that did not entirely conform to the strictures of royal protocol. These early signs were not dramatic in themselves, but carried a quiet weight in a court culture that valued conformity and meticulous control over appearances. Observers within the palace could detect nuances in behavior, tone, or decision-making that suggested a degree of independence or curiosity that, in less restrained circles, might have gone unnoticed. Her interactions with family members reflected both affection and individuality. While she shared moments of warmth with her parents and siblings, there were also times when her preferences and interests diverged from what was typically expected. These small divergences could manifest in choices of study, leisure, or even the manner in which she expressed herself during formal occasions. Such differences, though minor by ordinary standards, were magnified in the context of a royal household that closely monitored the comportment of all members, particularly daughters, whose reputations were intertwined with perceptions of propriety and virtue. Observers within the court may have begun to recognize in her a blend of compliance and quiet assertiveness, a combination that suggested a more complex character than was outwardly acknowledged. Alongside these behavioral distinctions, certain early events contributed to a perception of her as unusual or atypical among her contemporaries. Participation in ceremonies, adherence to etiquette, and engagement with royal duties were carefully noted, and any deviation could become a point of speculation. Princess Thyra's occasional reluctance to conform entirely to prescribed roles or her preference for private reflection over public performance may have drawn attention, creating a subtle tension between her individuality and the expectations of her station. In a court where even minor deviations could ripple outward in social consequences, these behaviors began to mark her as someone whose path might differ from the conventional trajectory of a princess. Rumors, quiet as they may have been, began to circulate within the palace environment. In royal households, where privacy was rare and news traveled quickly among courtiers, small incidents could take on outsized significance. Whispers of unusual friendships, unexpected interests, or unconventional behavior were enough to spark speculation and subtle commentary. These early rumors were rarely recorded officially, but their presence can be inferred from the way contemporary accounts occasionally reference tensions, misunderstandings, or unexplained changes in the dynamics of court life. In Thyra's case, such whispers hinted at the emergence of an individual whose private inclinations might challenge established norms, sowing the seeds for future stories that would eventually captivate attention, however discreetly. The formation of these hushed conversations illustrates the dual nature of court life. One part visible ceremony, one part intimate scrutiny. Courtiers, tutors, and family members often exchanged observations, some innocuous, others laden with judgment. Such exchanges could shape reputations, influence perceptions, and subtly direct the trajectory of a royal individual's public and private life. For Princess Thyra, this meant that the choices she made, the ways in which she expressed curiosity or emotion, and the alliances she formed within the household were all potentially subject to evaluation. Over time, these cumulative perceptions contributed to a sense that her life might diverge from the conventional expectations set for daughters of the Danish monarchy. The social norms of the period also played a role in shaping the court's response to her individuality. Female members of the royal family were expected to adhere to strict codes of behavior, both publicly and privately. These codes were grounded in broader societal assumptions about gender, class, and duty, and they dictated not only conduct but also the types of relationships considered acceptable, the subjects worthy of discussion, and even the manner in which emotions were expressed. Deviations from these norms, even subtle ones, could create ripples of commentary that were carefully contained but nonetheless influential. Princess Thyra's early behaviors, marked by curiosity and occasional independence, were therefore interpreted within this framework, intensifying attention and laying the groundwork for the eventual scandal that would later define her place in historical memory. Her intellectual and personal inclinations may have further contributed to the sense that she was not entirely conventional. Education within the royal household, while extensive, was often guided by both utility and propriety. Princesses were trained to read multiple languages, understand history and politics, and cultivate artistic and musical skills. Thyra's engagement with these subjects may have revealed a depth of interest or an unconventional approach that distinguished her from siblings or peers. Whether through reading choices, correspondence, or private reflection, she demonstrated a capacity for thought and inquiry that, in a highly regimented environment, could be interpreted as a sign of deviation from expectation. Such intellectual independence, while admirable, often became fodder for subtle court commentary, reinforcing the perception of her as a distinctive figure. Even leisure activities within the palace, though restricted, offered glimpses of her individuality. Royal children were permitted certain freedoms in play and social interaction, but these were closely monitored to ensure that they conformed to the decorum expected of their station. Princess Thyra may have exhibited preferences or talents that diverged from common royal pursuits, whether in artistic endeavors, intellectual exercises, or physical activities. These divergences, though minor in absolute terms, assumed significance in a context where visibility and perception were meticulously managed. Courtiers and observers, attuned to even slight differences in temperament or behavior, began to notice her capacity for subtle self-expression, and this recognition contributed to the gradual construction of a distinctive persona within the household. In addition to behavior and personal inclination, relationships within the palace environment influenced perceptions of Princess Thyra. Friendships, both within her family and among the broader circle of attendants and courtiers, were subject to scrutiny. Allies and confidants could provide support and companionship, but they could also be sources of rumor and speculation. In Thyra's case, the people with whom she associated may have fueled early whispers, either through actual incidents or through the interpretive lens of court observers. These dynamics created a complex social network in which trust, perception, and loyalty were constantly negotiated. The attention generated by these interactions helped to shape the early narrative of her life as one marked by quiet divergence from strict royal norms. As these observations and whispers accumulated, they set the stage for a broader awareness of her distinctiveness. Though no formal record may have captured the exact moments that marked her as different, the aggregate effect of small incidents, personal inclinations, and social interactions contributed to a perception that she was an individual whose life trajectory might not follow the predictable path of her siblings. The court's sensitivity to deviations from expectation amplified the significance of even minor acts of independence, creating a fertile ground for intrigue and speculation. This process illustrates the delicate balance between personal development and public perception in royal life, highlighting how subtle distinctions could evolve into reputational significance over time. At the same time, the cultural and political climate of the period magnified the potential impact of such divergence. European monarchies were closely observed, both internally and externally, and any hint of impropriety or unconventional behavior could be interpreted as symbolic or politically meaningful. In this context, Princess Thyra's early deviations, though personal in nature, were situated within a larger environment that prized uniformity, discipline, and the careful management of image. Observers, both within and beyond the palace walls, were attuned to these signals, creating an atmosphere in which even minor differences could resonate with broader significance, heightening anticipation for future developments. This convergence of personal individuality, familial observation, and courtly speculation contributed to the emergence of what would later be described as a whisper of scandal. It was not a single dramatic event, but rather a gradual accumulation of behavior, perception, and rumor that set her apart from her siblings and contemporaries. The narrative that began to form around her hinted at the existence of an individual whose life might challenge expectations, introduce complexity into the otherwise orderly patterns of the royal household, and eventually attract attention in ways that had both personal and historical consequences. This growing anticipation created a tension between the familiar security of her early upbringing and the unknown trajectory that awaited her. The whispers and quiet speculation also demonstrate the mechanisms by which historical narratives are often constructed. While official records focused on births, marriages, and ceremonial duties, the subtler currents of behavior, personality, and social perception often went undocumented, leaving historians to infer meaning from fragmentary accounts. In Princess Thyra's case, these undercurrents formed a precursor to events that would later dominate her historical narrative. They reveal the interplay between personal character and social expectation, showing how an individual's life can become the subject of intrigue even in the absence of overt transgression. Furthermore, the anticipation generated by these early signs of divergence illustrates the human tendency to invest meaning in subtle deviations. In a royal household, where behavior is regulated and monitored, even minor departures from expected conduct can become magnified through repeated observation, conversation, and interpretation. Princess Thyra's emerging persona, marked by quiet independence and intellectual curiosity, was therefore positioned to attract attention, speculation, and eventually more formal scrutiny. The narrative trajectory set in motion by these early events created a sense of expectation, hinting at future revelations and developments that would complicate both her personal life and her place within the royal family. In considering the formation of this early narrative, it is important to recognize the layered context in which Princess Thyra lived. Her individuality emerged against a backdrop of family loyalty, social expectation, educational opportunity, and courtly surveillance. Each of these elements interacted with the others, producing a complex environment in which deviation from norms could be noticed and interpreted. The accumulation of these observations and interpretations, while subtle, laid the foundation for the more explicit episodes that would later define her historical legacy. They provide a lens through which to understand the interplay of personality, circumstance, and perception in shaping the trajectory of a royal life. The significance of this period lies not in the magnitude of any single incident, but in the pattern that began to emerge. Princess Thyra's early life demonstrates how a combination of personal inclination, social observation, and cultural expectation can produce a narrative that hints at the extraordinary, even when no dramatic events have yet occurred. The whispers, subtle deviations, and quiet observations form a precursor to the eventual story that would capture attention, illustrating the ways in which a seemingly secure and conventional upbringing can contain the seeds of intrigue and deviation. Her life at this stage was characterized by the tension between conformity and individuality, between public expectation and private inclination, setting the stage for the more pronounced developments that would later unfold within her personal and familial sphere. The interplay of these factors created an environment in which anticipation and speculation were inevitable. The court's sensitivity to even minor departures from protocol ensured that her behavior would not go unnoticed, while her personal qualities ensured that her life would diverge, at least in subtle ways, from the expectations of royal observers. This combination of environment and character forged a space for the emergence of rumor and intrigue, shaping the narrative that would later be described as a whisper of scandal. In this sense, Princess Thyra's early life provides a rich context for understanding both her individuality and the mechanisms by which historical narratives about royal figures are constructed and transmitted. It was clear that she occupied a unique place within her family and courtly environment. Her behavior, personality, and relationships marked her as someone distinct, whose trajectory might diverge from conventional expectations. The subtle accumulation of observations, conversations, and hints of deviation from protocol foreshadowed the more dramatic episodes that would later define her story. This stage illustrates the intricate interplay of personality, social norms, and perception in shaping a royal life, revealing how even quiet beginnings can give rise to narratives of intrigue and anticipation that echo long into history. Princess Thyra's life, up to this point, had been marked by a delicate balance between familial affection, structured royal upbringing, and the subtle distinctions that set her apart within the household. Her individuality, evident through small deviations from expectation and quiet demonstrations of intellectual curiosity, had already begun to create murmurs within the court. These murmurs, minor at first, gradually formed a background of anticipation, a subtle tension between the visible composure expected of royalty and the emerging reality of a princess whose path diverged from the conventional narrative. It is in this context that the events which ultimately led to her erasure from public royal narratives took shape, a turning point that forever altered both her personal circumstances and the historical memory of her existence. The precise circumstances that brought this erasure into being are difficult to reconstruct in full detail, largely because the mechanisms of historical documentation often work to suppress, obscure, or sanitize such episodes. Royal households in this era maintained rigorous control over information, both to preserve public image and to prevent scandal from undermining the monarchy's authority. In Thyra's case, the documentation of her life becomes conspicuously sparse precisely at the moment when her behavior, relationships, or personal decisions began to conflict with the expectations imposed by her family and by society at large. The selective nature of these records suggests that those in positions of authority within the household deliberately curated the available information, presenting only what aligned with the official narrative and excluding elements that could provoke discomfort, disapproval, or controversy. This deliberate omission is the key to understanding the unspoken truth of her story. Available evidence indicates that the event or series of events that precipitated her marginalization involved a breach, perceived or real, of the social norms and familial expectations governing royal conduct. Unlike a dramatic public scandal involving governance, marriage, or diplomacy, this incident appears to have been intimately private, confined to interpersonal interactions within the household or immediate social circle. Even minor divergences, romantic attachments not sanctioned by the family, expressions of independence that challenged authority, or unconventional personal choices, could be amplified in significance because of their context within the tightly monitored life of a princess. The emphasis was on maintaining decorum and safeguarding the monarchy's image. Any potential threat to this carefully constructed order, no matter how minor by everyday standards, was treated with a level of severity disproportionate to the action itself. The immediate impact on Thyra's life was profound, shaping both her daily existence and her relationship with those closest to her. The withdrawal of public acknowledgement and formal representation within the royal family was a subtle yet powerful method of enforcing compliance and signaling disapproval. Where once her presence may have been comfortably integrated into ceremonial occasions, court events, or familial gatherings, she found her visibility curtailed, her interactions more closely monitored, and her movements within public spaces carefully controlled. This form of social containment served multiple purposes. It reinforced the authority of the monarchy, preserved the family's image, and subtly communicated to both the princess and onlookers the consequences of divergence from prescribed behavior. The erasure was not overtly punitive in the manner of exile or imprisonment, but it was nonetheless deeply isolating, effectively relegating her to a peripheral position within the household's official narrative. Her relationships within the family were similarly affected. The bonds forged during her early years, marked by warmth, companionship, and mutual respect, became strained under the weight of this enforced marginalization. Parents who had once celebrated her presence and supported her intellectual and emotional development may have responded with a mixture of disappointment, caution, and deliberate neglect, constrained by the dual imperatives of maintaining family unity and upholding public propriety. Siblings, particularly those poised for ascension to thrones or public roles, likely adjusted their interactions as well, navigating the tension between familial loyalty and adherence to expected norms. These relational shifts underscore the subtle mechanisms through which the royal family enforced social conformity and managed potential deviations from the established order. The historical record, though fragmentary, provides glimpses into the contours of this episode. Letters, official registers, and contemporary accounts hint at a withdrawal of recognition rather than a public condemnation. References to her activities diminish in frequency, ceremonial roles are reassigned or omitted, and personal details that might have been celebrated for other family members are conspicuously absent. Such patterns are indicative of deliberate curation, where the omission of attention serves as both a corrective measure and a form of social control. The silence surrounding her life becomes, paradoxically, a form of evidence, demonstrating the power of selective documentation to shape historical perception and enforce behavioral norms. In examining these sources, one perceives not only what is present, but also the significance of what is intentionally left unrecorded. The nature of the incident or series of incidents that led to this erasure also reflects the intersection of personal autonomy and dynastic expectation. Princess Thyra's early demonstration of individuality, intellectual curiosity, and subtle nonconformity may have played a role in precipitating the need for correction. While modern perspectives might interpret her behavior as an expression of personal growth or self-determination, within the context of late 19th century Danish royalty, such traits were potentially destabilizing. The monarchy's emphasis on hierarchy, decorum, and the careful cultivation of image meant that personal deviation could be construed as a threat, regardless of intent. This tension between private inclination and public expectation lies at the heart of the unspoken truth of her story. The deliberate silence that followed this event served multiple functions within the royal household. It operated as a mechanism of social regulation, ensuring that other members of the family adhered to expected norms and understood the consequences of divergence. It also preserved the public image of the monarchy, preventing potentially damaging details from reaching wider audiences. In effect, the suppression of information became a tool of narrative construction, allowing the family to maintain control over both memory and history. The absence of attention, the careful reassignment of roles, and the selective documentation all contributed to a historiographical void in which Princess Thyra's presence was increasingly minimized, rendering her effectively invisible within the official annals of her family. Despite the scarcity of direct documentation, it is possible to trace the contours of her marginalization through careful analysis of related records. Shifts in ceremonial participation, variations in recorded appearances, and gaps in correspondence reveal patterns consistent with deliberate exclusion. These elements, when considered collectively, offer insight into the mechanisms by which a royal family might enforce conformity while preserving the semblance of internal harmony. They also underscore the human impact of such measures, highlighting the personal costs of social control, including isolation, restricted agency, and diminished recognition. Princess Thyra's experience exemplifies how the pressures of duty and reputation could override considerations of individual merit, aspiration, or character, reshaping both daily life and historical memory. Her erasure also illuminates broader social and cultural norms of the period. Royal households were governed by an intricate interplay of tradition, etiquette, and strategic consideration. Deviations from prescribed conduct were rarely met with overt punishment. Rather, subtle measures of correction and marginalization were employed to maintain cohesion and authority. The mechanisms of silence, omission from records, curtailment of visibility, and careful management of narrative were powerful instruments precisely because they operated below the threshold of public notice. In Princess Thyra's case, this approach ensured that the family's reputation remained intact while simultaneously signaling the limits of acceptable behavior to both her and others within the household. The psychological and emotional consequences of this period must also be considered. For a young woman accustomed to familial support, structured learning, and social recognition, the sudden contraction of attention and the imposition of enforced invisibility would have been profoundly disorienting. The sense of marginalization, combined with the awareness that her life was now subject to selective documentation and deliberate omission, likely shaped her self-perception and influenced her subsequent decisions. It may have fostered resilience, introspection, or conversely, a sense of alienation. Understanding this internal dimension is crucial for appreciating the human reality behind the historical erasure, providing context for both her personal development and the enduring intrigue surrounding her story. The erasure of Princess Thyra from public narratives also serves as a case study in the construction of historical memory. Her life illustrates how selective documentation, familial control, and cultural norms intersect to determine which figures are preserved in collective memory and which are quietly obscured. The sparse evidence that remains, the intermittent correspondence, fragmentary mentions in court records, and gaps in ceremonial documentation, allows historians to infer both the existence of the incident and the methods used to manage its aftermath. This form of reconstruction emphasizes the interplay between presence and absence, between what is recorded and what is deliberately silenced, highlighting the active role of narrative control in shaping historical understanding. Moreover, the methods of erasure employed in Princess Thyra's case reveal the subtlety of social control within elite households. Rather than resorting to public censure or dramatic punishment, the royal family utilized discretion, withdrawal of recognition, and omission to regulate behavior. These strategies maintained outward appearances of harmony and propriety while simultaneously enforcing compliance and signaling authority internally. The result was a dual reality: an individual whose personal identity and experiences remained rich and complex, yet whose public recognition and historical memory were effectively suppressed. This duality underscores the tension between lived experience and official narrative, a tension that defines much of her historical presence. Examining the historical evidence that remains, one notes patterns that suggest intentional management of visibility. Changes in court schedules, reassignment of ceremonial duties, and absence from records that otherwise document sibling activities indicate a deliberate calibration of attention. Even in personal correspondence, mentions are often indirect, coded, or minimized, reflecting an awareness of both social propriety and the desire to maintain discretion. These fragments, while incomplete, collectively convey the contours of a life shaped by deliberate marginalization, allowing modern observers to piece together the underlying dynamics even in the absence of full documentation. In reflecting upon this period, it becomes evident that the unspoken truth of Princess Thyra's life is inseparable from the broader structures of power, expectation, and social conformity that governed her world. Her erasure from public narrative was not merely an individual misfortune. It was a deliberate act of social management, rooted in the priorities of the royal household, the cultural norms of the era, and the need to preserve familial and institutional reputation. It illustrates how personal behavior, even when subtle or private, can intersect with broader systems of authority to produce outcomes that shape both lived experience and historical legacy. Finally, the story of Princess Thyra's erasure emphasizes the enduring significance of silence in history. The deliberate omission of details, the careful curtailment of public acknowledgement, and the selective preservation of records all function to remove her from the narrative of her own family. Yet this very absence, paradoxically, creates a form of resonance. It highlights the mechanisms of control, the fragility of visibility, and the ways in which historical memory is constructed. Her life, though obscured, offers insight into the dynamics of power, expectation, and individuality, demonstrating that even in silence, a story can persist, compelling examination, interpretation, and understanding across generations. Following the pivotal moment that reshaped her place within the royal family, Princess Thyra's life entered a markedly different phase, one defined by marginalization and careful containment rather than public recognition or ceremonial prominence. The earlier whispers and subtle deviations that hinted at her individuality had culminated in an enforced obscurity, and from this point forward, her daily existence reflected the quiet consequences of divergence within a structured and hierarchical environment. Whereas previously she had moved through the household with a combination of familial warmth, structured education, and growing personal awareness, she now found herself navigating a space where her presence was consciously minimized, and her role in public life was carefully limited. This phase of her life, though less visible in official records, is no less revealing for understanding both her character and the broader dynamics of royal power, expectation, and historical memory. Her removal from the public did not involve exile or formal condemnation. Rather, it was executed through subtler mechanisms, characteristic of elite households in which discretion and preservation of reputation were paramount. Invitations to court events, ceremonial duties, and engagements that might have placed her in the public were reduced or omitted entirely. Official correspondence, family records, and ceremonial accounts increasingly focused on her siblings and other relatives who adhered closely to expected norms, leaving Thyra's achievements, personal milestones, and daily activities largely unrecorded. The effect was to render her life peripheral in historical documentation, creating a narrative vacuum that subsequent chroniclers and observers struggled to fill. In this context, the silence surrounding her public role speaks as loudly as any proclamation or declaration, emphasizing how erasure operates not through dramatics, but through absence. Despite this marginalization, Princess Thyra did not disappear entirely from her own lived experience. Within private spaces, she cultivated subtle forms of autonomy, intellectual engagement, and personal resilience that reveal the depth of her character. These acts, though often undocumented or understated in official records, demonstrate a persistent assertion of agency in an environment designed to constrain and control. For instance, she may have pursued intellectual interests through private study, correspondence with trusted confidants, or engagement with literature, music, and artistic endeavors. In an era when royal daughters were both highly educated and tightly monitored, these private pursuits provided an avenue for personal fulfillment and self-expression, creating a domain in which her individuality could flourish even in the absence of public recognition. Socially, her relationships were shaped by a combination of necessity and discretion. Close connections within the household, whether with siblings, attendants, or tutors, provided companionship and emotional support, yet were framed by the ongoing pressures of invisibility. Interactions were likely constrained by both expectation and propriety, requiring careful negotiation to maintain bonds without attracting scrutiny. These private networks may have been essential in sustaining her emotional well-being and preserving a sense of identity, illustrating the ways in which marginalized individuals navigate social spaces to maintain connection and agency even when formal recognition is withheld. Princess Thyra's existence in this phase of her life contrasts sharply with that of her siblings and contemporaries, whose lives were marked by visibility, ceremony, and public acclaim. Brothers who would ascend to thrones, sisters whose marriages aligned dynastic interests, and cousins engaged in prominent political or social roles all enjoyed opportunities for historical recognition that were systematically denied to her. This juxtaposition underscores the uniqueness of her story, highlighting how proximity to power and shared lineage does not guarantee participation in the public narrative. The differential treatment she received illuminates broader questions about historical memory, social hierarchy, and the mechanisms by which some lives are recorded in detail while others are quietly obscured. Within the confines of her limited public engagement, Princess Thyra nevertheless demonstrated quiet resilience. Evidence of this may be seen in her ability to maintain personal dignity, pursue intellectual or creative activities, and cultivate relationships despite ongoing marginalization. Such resilience is often subtle, manifesting not in overt defiance, but in the careful preservation of self within restrictive circumstances. By continuing to inhabit her own space, exercise judgment, and maintain interests independent of official sanction, she carved a sphere of personal integrity, demonstrating that survival within constrained conditions requires both discretion and strength. These acts of quiet resistance, though largely invisible in historical documentation, are crucial for understanding her enduring significance as a figure whose life defied complete erasure. The psychological landscape of this period would have been complex. Being sidelined from public recognition while aware of the comparative prominence of siblings could generate a mix of emotions: disappointment, alienation, longing, or even determination to assert personal worth through private achievement. Her self-perception and internal coping mechanisms likely evolved to accommodate the dual realities of reduced visibility and ongoing familial connection. This negotiation of identity, balancing private affirmation against public absence, is emblematic of lives lived in the shadows, where agency exists alongside constraint and personal significance is cultivated independently of historical acknowledgement. Even as she receded from ceremonial life, Princess Thyra's presence within the family and household persisted in less overt ways. Her intellectual engagement, potential mentorship of younger relatives, or participation in domestic management may have provided avenues for influence and contribution that did not attract public attention, but nevertheless shaped the household's internal dynamics. These less visible forms of impact demonstrate how marginalized individuals often exert influence through subtler channels, highlighting the multiplicity of ways in which life can retain meaning and purpose even when official recognition is denied. The contrast between her overshadowed existence and the celebrated lives of her siblings emphasizes the selective nature of historical memory. Brothers who became kings were commemorated through state documents, public ceremonies, and dynastic histories. Sisters who married into other European houses were chronicled in correspondence, social reportage, and genealogical records. By contrast, Princess Thyra's narrative is constructed primarily through omission, silence, and fragmentary references. This discrepancy illustrates how historical narratives are shaped not only by deeds and character, but also by the mechanisms of documentation, social expectation, and power, revealing the ways in which some individuals are rendered visible while others are intentionally relegated to the margins. Her life in these shadows also serves as a lens through which to examine the broader social and cultural structures of her time. Royal households relied upon visibility as a form of currency. Ceremonial presence, public recognition, and dynastic documentation conferred legitimacy and reinforced hierarchy. The deliberate marginalization of Princess Thyra reflects the priorities of such institutions: maintaining uniformity, controlling narrative, and managing reputation. By comparing her trajectory to that of contemporaries, one observes how the interplay of personal conduct, family expectation, and social norms determined not only immediate circumstances, but also long-term historical remembrance. In these circumstances, the small acts of personal assertion she may have engaged in acquire heightened significance. Choices of reading, artistic creation, selective social engagement, and cultivation of internal networks became tools for self-expression and self-definition. These behaviors demonstrate that even within the constraints of marginalization, an individual can construct a meaningful and distinctive existence. Princess Thyra's life underscores the subtle power of private agency. The capacity to live with intention and integrity, even when denied public affirmation or ceremonial recognition. The narrative of her overshadowed life also illuminates the human dimension of historical erasure. Beyond the structural and social mechanisms, her experience reveals the emotional and psychological consequences of exclusion. The negotiation of self-worth, the cultivation of resilience, and the ongoing management of relationships under conditions of marginalization. These elements enrich our understanding of royal life, highlighting that beneath the surface of ceremony, privilege, and lineage, individual experiences could vary dramatically, shaped by both personal choices and the broader imperatives of family and institution. By tracing the path of Princess Thyra's existence after her marginalization, one observes a life that is both constrained and rich, subdued yet enduring. The combination of quiet resilience, private accomplishment, and personal integrity demonstrates the complexity of navigating social and familial exclusion. Her experience provides a stark contrast to the documented prominence of her siblings, reinforcing the uniqueness of her story and the broader implications for understanding historical memory, social power, and the management of deviation within elite households. Her continued existence, although largely invisible in public records, serves as a testament to the ways in which lives can persist, adapt, and find meaning even under deliberate suppression. Each private choice, intellectual pursuit, and relational engagement becomes a form of quiet defiance, an assertion of individuality within a context designed to minimize visibility. Through these acts, she retained a sense of self, demonstrating that personal significance is not solely determined by public recognition, ceremonial role, or historical documentation. Moreover, the juxtaposition of her life with the celebrated trajectories of her contemporaries highlights how historical narratives are constructed, curated, and perpetuated. Visibility, commemoration, and documentation confer authority upon certain individuals, while the absence of recognition relegates others to obscurity. Princess Thyra's story exemplifies this process, showing how a combination of circumstance, family choice, and social expectation can determine which lives are celebrated and which are quietly erased, regardless of personal merit or achievement. Her existence in the shadows, therefore, becomes a lens for understanding resilience, agency, and the construction of historical memory. It emphasizes that significance is not solely the product of public attention, and that individuals can exercise influence, cultivate identity, and maintain dignity even when officially unacknowledged. Princess Thyra's experience demonstrates that lives lived outside the spotlight, though absent from official narrative, contain rich and instructive dimensions, offering insight into the intersection of personal character, institutional control, and social expectation. The later phase of Princess Thyra's life illustrates the profound impact of marginalization within a hierarchical and closely monitored environment. Her trajectory, shaped by the unspoken consequences of deviation from royal norms, reveals both the mechanisms of social control and the resilience of personal agency. Through private acts of engagement, intellectual pursuit, and relational cultivation, she preserved a sense of identity and purpose despite her reduced visibility. Contrasted with the celebrated lives of siblings and contemporaries, her story underscores the uniqueness of her experience, the deliberate construction of historical memory, and the ways in which lives can retain significance even in deliberate obscurity. Her narrative, though largely undocumented in public records, provides a rich and instructive perspective on life within the shadows of royal privilege. It demonstrates how personal resilience, discretion, and private achievement intersect with social expectation and institutional power, offering a nuanced understanding of both the individual and the system in which she lived. Princess Thyra's experience stands as a testament to the enduring capacity of human agency, the subtleties of historical erasure, and the complexity of lives lived at the intersection of personal aspiration and imposed invisibility. The story of Princess Thyra, largely absent from public records and overshadowed by her siblings' celebrated lives, has gradually attracted the attention of historians, genealogists, and enthusiasts of European royal history who seek to uncover the neglected corners of dynastic narratives. In recent decades, there has been a modest but growing movement to revisit such overlooked figures, emphasizing the importance of personal experiences that were deliberately minimized or erased. The renewed interest in Princess Thyra reflects both a curiosity about the inner lives of royalty and a broader scholarly commitment to understanding how social norms, power structures, and institutional priorities shaped the historical record. Unlike her brothers and sisters, who were commemorated in ceremonial accounts, state documents, and public chronicles, Thyra's life exists primarily through fragmented correspondence, sparse mentions in diaries, and the careful reading of omissions. These traces offer tantalizing glimpses of her existence, encouraging contemporary scholars to piece together her experiences and reconsider the significance of marginalization in the construction of historical memory. Efforts to reclaim her narrative often begin with a meticulous examination of available evidence, combining genealogical research, archival exploration, and the study of secondary sources that reference her indirectly. Letters between family members, although limited, can reveal emotional dynamics, personal reflections, and the small acts of daily life that were excluded from formal record. Court documents, when read critically, often show patterns of selective acknowledgement, moments in which she is present, omitted, or mentioned only in passing. Even the silences, gaps, and deliberate omissions become meaningful, signaling the ways in which control over narrative operated within the royal household. Modern researchers use these fragmentary pieces to reconstruct a fuller understanding of her life, exploring both what was recorded and what was intentionally left out, revealing the layered interplay between individual experience and institutional priorities. Contemporary interest in Princess Thyra's story also reflects changing perspectives on the study of history itself. Traditional royal histories have often prioritized public achievements, political alliances, and ceremonial roles, leaving little room for the personal, the private, or the socially constrained. However, current historiography increasingly values the exploration of marginalized voices, the study of silences, and the recovery of experiences that do not fit neatly into official accounts. Thyra's life offers an instructive example of how social norms, familial expectations, and institutional control could shape both lived experience and historical memory. By examining her story, historians can better understand the mechanisms of exclusion, the consequences of deviation from prescribed roles, and the subtle forms of resilience that individuals employed to maintain identity and agency despite marginalization. The implications of these royal silences extend beyond the life of a single princess. They reveal broader patterns of power, social expectation, and historical record-keeping in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In an era when monarchy was closely intertwined with societal hierarchy, reputation, and public perception, deviations from established norms, whether in behavior, personal choice, or intellectual engagement, were often met with quiet but effective mechanisms of suppression. The act of erasure, as seen in Thyra's life, served multiple purposes, reinforcing internal hierarchy, preserving public image, and signaling the consequences of divergence to other members of the household. This phenomenon illustrates how historical records, while seemingly objective, are often shaped by subjective decisions about what is considered important, appropriate, or worthy of preservation. It also highlights the limitations inherent in traditional accounts, which can obscure the complexities of individual experience and perpetuate a narrow understanding of historical reality. Recovering Thyra's narrative allows modern audiences to challenge these limitations and to consider the human dimension of royal life beyond ceremonial and political accomplishments. Her life demonstrates that even those who exist largely in the shadows of history can provide meaningful insight into social structures, familial relationships, and cultural expectations. By focusing on the personal, the private, and the overlooked, researchers and enthusiasts can gain a more nuanced understanding of the period, including how gender, class, and power shaped daily life, emotional experience, and social positioning. Moreover, Thyra's story underscores the resilience of individuals whose identities were constrained by systemic forces, offering examples of quiet determination, intellectual engagement, and personal agency that persisted despite official marginalization. The contemporary effort to bring Princess Thyra's story into public awareness is inherently collaborative. It relies not only on archival research, but also on the engagement of readers, enthusiasts, and scholars who contribute perspectives, interpretations, and newly discovered sources. Online forums, genealogical databases, and historical societies provide platforms for the discussion and dissemination of findings, enabling a broader community to participate in reconstructing her narrative. In this way, the reclamation of her life is not limited to formal academic work. It also encompasses popular engagement, public curiosity, and collective memory. By inviting multiple voices to contribute, the project challenges traditional hierarchies of historical authority and emphasizes the value of inclusive approaches to understanding the past. Engagement with Princess Thyra's story can also inspire reflection on contemporary approaches to memory, recognition, and the preservation of individual experience. Just as she was overshadowed by the prominence of her siblings, countless historical figures, particularly women, those of lower social status, or individuals whose lives diverged from societal expectations, have been omitted from narratives that privilege visibility and conformity. Recovering these stories allows for a reassessment of historical priorities, encouraging a more expansive and empathetic view of the past. In doing so, Thyra's narrative becomes a lens for exploring broader issues of representation, the ethics of historiography, and the consequences of selective documentation. Her life encourages modern audiences to consider not only what has been recorded, but also what has been silenced, and to interrogate the social and institutional forces that shape these outcomes. Modern researchers and enthusiasts have begun to explore avenues such as comparative studies, genealogical reconstruction, and contextual analysis to situate Princess Thyra within the broader European royal network. By examining her in relation to her siblings, cousins, and contemporaries, it is possible to highlight both the privileges she enjoyed and the limitations imposed upon her. These comparisons reveal the stark contrasts between her public invisibility and the celebrated trajectories of others, underscoring the consequences of marginalization while simultaneously illuminating her resilience and capacity for agency within constrained circumstances. Furthermore, contextual studies allow for the exploration of broader cultural, political, and social factors that influenced her life, including gendered expectations, dynastic pressures, and the intricate balance between personal desire and institutional obligation. The act of reclaiming her narrative also carries an implicit ethical dimension. Recognizing Princess Thyra's existence and experiences addresses historical injustice, however modestly, by restoring a voice that was systematically muted. This process does not seek to dramatize or romanticize her life, but rather to acknowledge her humanity, complexity, and presence within a historical context that often denied such acknowledgement. It challenges the assumption that only the most visible figures merit attention, demonstrating that history is richer and more instructive when inclusive of lives that were deliberately obscured. In doing so, the reclamation of her narrative contributes to a more complete understanding of both individual experience and societal structures, revealing the interplay of power, expectation, and personal agency in shaping historical outcomes. Additionally, modern scholarship has the potential to uncover new sources that may further illuminate her life. Unexplored archives, personal collections, and familial correspondence could provide insights into her thoughts, emotions, and private activities, complementing existing documentation. Oral histories, family anecdotes, and local records may also contain valuable information, contributing to a more nuanced understanding of her daily life, personality, and relationships. These avenues of research underscore the collaborative and ongoing nature of historical recovery, emphasizing that understanding overlooked figures requires both persistence and creativity, as well as a willingness to challenge assumptions derived from incomplete records. Public engagement in the reclamation of Princess Thyra's story is equally important. By raising awareness, encouraging discussion, and sharing research findings, modern audiences can help bring attention to historical figures whose lives were marginalized. This participatory approach allows for the co-creation of historical understanding, bridging gaps between academic scholarship and public curiosity. It also fosters critical reflection on broader themes, including the treatment of women in history, the mechanisms of social exclusion, and the ways in which institutions shape memory. In engaging with Thyra's story, Readers are invited not only to appreciate the particulars of her life, but also to consider the broader implications of omission, silence, and selective documentation in shaping collective memory. The reclamation of Princess Thyra's narrative also prompts reflection on contemporary approaches to historiography and the value of inclusivity in historical research. Her life exemplifies the consequences of hierarchical control over memory, showing how societal norms, familial expectations, and institutional priorities can shape which stories are preserved and which are suppressed. By investigating these dynamics, historians and enthusiasts can gain a richer understanding of the mechanisms that determine historical visibility, as well as the personal and social costs associated with marginalization. The exploration of her story serves as a reminder that historical narratives are not neutral. They are constructed, curated, and often contested, and revisiting overlooked lives is essential to achieving a more comprehensive and equitable understanding of the past. Reclaiming Princess Thyra's narrative is both a scholarly and moral endeavor. It emphasizes the importance of acknowledging lives that were deliberately minimized, recognizing the complexity of individual experience, and understanding the structural forces that shaped historical memory. Her story illustrates the ways in which marginalization operates, the resilience required to navigate constrained circumstances, and the potential for modern scholarship and public engagement to restore visibility to those who were once silenced. In doing so, her life not only enriches our understanding of European royalty, but also provides a framework for examining broader patterns of inclusion, exclusion, and the ethics of memory in historical study. For contemporary audiences, the process of engaging with Princess Thyra's story can also serve as a call to action. By sharing knowledge, contributing research, and reflecting on the consequences of omission, individuals can help ensure that overlooked figures receive the recognition and consideration they merit. Whether through archival investigation, genealogical research, or public discussion, each effort contributes to the gradual reconstruction of a fuller and more nuanced historical narrative. The reclamation of her life demonstrates that even those relegated to the shadows possess significance, and that their experiences can illuminate the broader social, cultural, and institutional forces that shaped history. Furthermore, the renewed attention to Thyra's life encourages exploration of new research avenues, including cross-referencing archival materials, comparing contemporary accounts, and analyzing the broader political and social context of her era. Investigating her intellectual pursuits, personal relationships, and private activities can provide insight into the ways she negotiated marginalization, exercised agency, and maintained personal integrity. These lines of inquiry not only enrich our understanding of her individual experience, but also shed light on the mechanisms of control, conformity, and resilience that shaped the lives of many who were similarly constrained by societal and institutional expectations. In considering the significance of Princess Thyra's narrative today, it becomes clear that her life offers more than a simple historical footnote. It illuminates the interplay of power, social expectation, and personal agency, demonstrating how even lives that were deliberately minimized can yield profound insights into historical structures, human resilience, and the ethical dimensions of memory. By recognizing her experiences, reconstructing her story, and reflecting on the forces that led to her marginalization, modern audiences not only honor her life, but also challenge assumptions about whose experiences are deemed worthy of remembrance. Her story, once silenced, now becomes an opportunity for inquiry, reflection, and the expansion of historical understanding. Through careful reconstruction, critical analysis, and public engagement, the narrative of Princess Thyra can be brought into sharper focus, restoring a voice that was long denied and acknowledging the complexity of her lived experience. The reclamation of her story underscores the importance of examining overlooked historical figures, interrogating the mechanisms of exclusion, and embracing a more inclusive and empathetic approach to the study of history. By doing so, scholars and enthusiasts alike can contribute to a broader recognition of lives that were previously erased, demonstrating that historical significance is not solely determined by visibility, privilege, or public acclaim, but also by resilience, agency, and the enduring impact of personal experience. The effort to reclaim her narrative emphasizes the need to critically engage with history as a living discourse rather than a fixed record. Princess Thyra's life invites reconsideration of accepted narratives, challenges assumptions about historical importance, and encourages active participation in the preservation and interpretation of the past. By investigating her life, reflecting on its broader implications, and sharing insights with wider audiences, modern researchers and enthusiasts honor her memory, while simultaneously enriching the collective understanding of royal history, social dynamics, and the enduring consequences of marginalization. Her story becomes both an example and a call, demonstrating that even those who lived in the shadows possess the capacity to inform, inspire, and reshape our understanding of the past.